From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 559. In this episode, Scott talks with Angie Jones about including automation in the software development cycle.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Angie Jones. She's a consulting automation engineer. She works at LexisNexis and also has been an adjunct professor of computer programming at community college. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Scott?
I am very happy to be talking to you because you are about all things automation.
I
know
am.
that you spoke at Test Bash recently.
Right, I did. In Philadelphia, yep.
Mm-hmm. And the title I thought was pretty cool, and I noticed that Twitter kind of lit up when you started giving this talk. You basically said, how do you get automation included in the definition of done? That makes me think that you believe that people do not respect automation enough, and maybe they need to expand their sense of what done means.
Right, and not so much respect. I think they just don't think that it's feasible or achievable to get done in a typical agile sprint cycle. So for most people, it's this black box, and all that they really know is that it takes a lot of time, right? And even automation engineers themselves, in trying to automate all the things or even some of the things, they struggle with being able to do this in a fast, efficient way. So the talk was pretty much on how do you get it in your definition of done. What are some tips and tricks and techniques that you can use to be able to make your automation agile friendly?
Okay. So when an application is agile friendly, I think in our minds, I think about things like, maybe continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Exactly.
What, when we think about automation, are you talking about basically anything that isn't manual? Like, do I want to just take anything I do twice? Like, if I could do something twice, it's like, that should be automated.
Yeah. Typically, what I'm talking about is test automation, but that definitely can be extended to other processes that we use within our team. So that's where we're trying to push automation. When I say we, I mean just kind of other thought leaders in the automation space, is not just limiting ourselves to the tests, but as we're all trying to be more agile and move quicker, we need to automate some of these repetitive tasks that we do as well.
Why do you think people get caught up in doing things manually? Like, I've always felt like we should have a sense of smell, and if you feel yourself doing something twice and it's manual, you should smell that and you should go, maybe I need to write a batch file, or maybe there's a way. But then we just continue to do things, and people will, for years, have a manual deployment or a manual test that they do.
Exactly. One, I just think, I don't know, it's just not in the front of people's brains to think, oh, maybe I should automate this, or maybe even if you don't have the skill set, maybe I should get someone else to automate this. One, I don't think they think about it. So two, when I point these types of things out, like, oh, we can automate that, it's almost like a resistance from people. Like, no. I think they don't trust automating, and like, no, it won't be able to do it how I do it, And then two, there's this fear of, well, if we have that automated, then what about me? Is there still a need for me, the human?
That is actually an interesting point. I think that we may not say that out loud, but I know that people feel that.
Yep, exactly.
So, when we say that a feature is finished, does being automatically testable or automated a part of that definition by default, do you think? Or does that do people need to be reminded of that?
Testable, yes. Tested, yes. Automated, not so much. So that's the purpose of the talk. Like, one of the points that I bring out is, okay, so we say that it's tested and we feel good about that, and we go ahead and close this out, but we're bringing this technical debt along with us, right? So it's not automated. No one's testing this again until some period of time deemed as regression testing, right? So we're bringing the technical debt of having to automate. Like, we know we want to automate it at some point, and it's probably probably being thrown on some backlog, and we have automation engineers who are focused on automating this at some point in life. That could be months from now. If it's a low priority test, it could be a year from now, right? So my whole message is, how do we get this incorporated into our mindset so that we finish all the things that we need to do before we actually consider this done? No tech debt.
So then I think that the subtext there, if I may, is that it's not important, and that's why it's not in the definition. People are saying, well, when you get time, when you have time, go ahead and automate that test. But, it works. And like you said, when it gets done.
Right.
But in the future, that might be never. It may literally never get done. So then if it doesn't get done, then it didn't matter.
Right, exactly. And so I think people are missing like the importance of this. And we think it's important, which is why we have these long extended regression cycles, right? So yeah, we do want to test it again at some point before we release this to a customer, or we've added so much functionality. I think it's a good point to go ahead and regress all of this with all the tests that we have. So we think it's important. It's just a matter of, do we want to go through the pain of actually doing it now, or push that pain out? And so when you're trying to move fast and you're doing these continuous integrations and things like that, that's where the focus is on. We have to create new development, and our testers will test this, and we'll just pretend that everything is good until the end, when we get to this long regression phase and come up with like all of these different issues that could have been caught a lot sooner. So I think it's like a transformation too of the mindset from waterfall to agile.
So in your talk, you not only just advocate for automation, which is, I would say, not controversial, but you also are a little more controversial in that you say that we should get the automation engineer what they need before the developer even starts writing code. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, so the automation engineers and teams that I've worked on before, they have been isolated, and they're working in this silo with these backlog of test cases that they need to automate, right? So no one's even aware of what's being automated and when. So one of the ways I say that you can get automation in the definition of done is by embedding that automation engineer into the sprint teams, right? And so when you do that, I try to paint the picture of what does that look like? How do they interact with the other team members? How do they educate them? How do they get what they need from them to be able to do this? Because it is a shift left in the process. And so being able to achieve this, you have to get other people involved. And one of those people would be the developer, right? And so I talk about techniques of working with the developer and kind of doing like a sketch session before any coding begins. So let's go ahead and both agree on, if it's a UI, what's this UI going to look like? If it's a web service, what's that going to look like? And go ahead and conceptualize that in the beginning before we write any code. So that fleshes out a lot of the detail and a lot of the misconceptions. And then once you have that part done, go ahead and take it a step further and start identifying the elements that's going to be used and putting identifiers on those and making basically a contract with the developer to let them know, okay, for me to automate this, this is what I need from you. So this is how we're going to make this automatable. And kind of just having that conversation, because as many times as I ask for IDs on elements and for them to be created a certain type of way, the developer just doesn't remember to do that. So in having this conversation and having them be a part of that exercise kind of reinforces that, and then they remember. It works beautifully.
What was it? Someone said that if it's not someone's job, it just won't get done.
It just
right?
won't get
so
done.
like if you just count on the good nature of the developer to make sure that you get your automation IDs on elements, it's never going to happen. And then you're going to feel like a second-class citizen on your team.
Yep.
And they're not setting you up for success.
Exactly. And then I have to go back and kind of nag and whine and ask them for it. Now, who's going to stop doing their development work to go and put some IDs on old things that they've already done, right? Nobody wants to do that. So doing this in advance to writing any code, having it spec'd out, giving them a copy of it, letting them go back to their desk with that copy and develop, right? That kind of sets it up for success. And it gives a sense of empathy. So they realize now, oh, okay, I see why she needed this. And so they understand the pain points now and a little bit more empathetic to that.
Okay. But if I try to go and automate everything, that's not going to fit in a sprint.
Exactly. It's not.
How do I decide what to automate and what not to?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like suddenly I feel like this is a good podcast, but now I have a lot more work to do.
Right. So I tell teams, like, don't try to automate everything. And that typically comes from the top down, where you have an executive or a manager who's saying, yes, we need to automate everything, automate all the tests, right? My issue with that is, one, not only will it not fit in a sprint, two, this is living, breathing code that we have to maintain, right? So maintaining these low value tests is not the best idea. Having these low value tests run in a continuous integration or continuous deployment pipeline and making developers wait for the feedback from these low value tests is not a good idea in my opinion either. So I advise teams to look at what your tests are and pick the ones that you think are best candidates for automation. And that could be based on risk. Talk with your business folks, your business analysts, your product owners. Talk with them and see, what are we building? Why are we building it? Who are we building it for? How are they going to use this? Do you have any data, any analytics on how our customers are using these features? Or the, similar features to the ones that we're developing. So let's see what people are doing with this product and then automate the most important risk-based scenarios out of that batch.
Mm-hmm. And you actually have a part of, and we'll put your slides online. Your slides are online. I'll link to them from the show notes. But you have this interesting mapping between, you say, like, here's the user story, here's the feature, and then out of that are these 8, 9, 10 tests, which seems intuitive and obvious after you've said it out loud. But I know I've worked on teams that haven't done that before. So I thought that was really cool to say, all right, well, here's a user story. Here are the 8 tests or the 8 ideas for tests that pop out of that. And then that tells you, the developer, what you're going to need to do to set up the automation engineer for success. Yeah.
And even from that, so here are the 10 tests, right? Do we want to automate all of them? Let's look at which ones are the higher risk ones and which ones are we okay with testing it manually and then kind of leaving it alone.
Oh, interesting. So then you would sort them basically for automatability, or like what is the most attractive one to be automated.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you show when you are, drawing out your kind of your pencil layouts or your balsamic kind of like layouts of what a page looks like, you actually show the path, the automation path to that particular item.
Exactly.
I thought that was a really, really useful tip. So like I'm looking at this balsamic picture here that says like, div ID equals product, blah, 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 this class. You're pointing the automation engineer right to where what they need is, and they don't have to go digging for it.
Right. And I'm showing the developer that path too, so that they understand this is how I'm going to automate this. And so I need you to do your part to make sure this goes smoothly.
Mm-hmm. So you introduce, in order to make this possible, this ranking, you introduce this concept called the automation pyramid. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a concept from Mike Coyne, and it talks about basically like 3 layers, where the UI layer is the smallest layer, meaning that you should have the smallest amount of your automation in that layer. The next one is the service layer, and then your biggest layer is your unit test layer. So basically he's saying that if you look at all of your automation, most of it should be at the unit test layer. And then the next largest amount should be at the service layer. And then the very smallest amount should be at the UI layer. And so a lot of teams struggle with this because if you're delivering new UI code, it's intuitive to want to test it at the UI layer, right? And when you automate it, the same kind of thing. You just automate it at the UI layer because this is a new UI. And so I feel like I have to. And so I can understand that pain point. And so what I talk about is not restricting yourself to just one of those layers. Your test doesn't have to live in one of those layers. If it's a new UI piece and you want to test the UI of that, go for it. But there's a lot of steps involved in that test case that doesn't involve that new UI piece. And so for those steps, forget the UI, use the service layer, for example, or use some other cheats that you might come up with, like navigating directly to a certain page that you need to, as opposed to going through the menu items and traversing through that.
Mm-hmm. So you could unit test a service, you could unit test a UI, you could consider a UI test a full integration test, depending on how you set up your environment. But it sounds like understanding your stack and how data moves through your stack is kind of fundamental to knowing what you need to automate and what you should focus on automating.
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of getting under the covers a little bit, because as a test engineer, I think they understand how do I get to this pretty well, right? But from the UI is where they understand that. So I do a lot of training with test engineers who are getting into automation on understanding what's going on under the covers, right? So looking into log files and Splunk logs and things like that to see, when you do this on the UI, what's actually going on the back end. And let's see how we can utilize that back end code within our automation code as opposed to going on the UI.
Okay. And you, I want to dig a little bit into some of the tools that you use. You teach, you do like, workshops and full day workshops. We talk mostly about, doing work on the web, right? I assume that most of your work is on web automation.
I do a lot in web service and stuff as well. Yeah.
But are you're not automating like Windows apps?
Oh, no.
You're doing mostly Selenium.
Yeah. Yep.
So when you're doing Selenium work, are you doing automation of web applications and using specific web drivers? Do you automate? How does that work? Like, maybe introduce us to Selenium and help me understand whether I'm automating a specific browser, or I'm using the Shadow DOM, or can I automate any browser? Yeah,
so Selenium will allow you to automate most of the popular browsers. So there are web drivers available for each of these. And a lot of teams, they'll focus on the ones that their application supports. So, hey, my application supports Chrome, Firefox, and IE. Okay, cool. I'll use those web drivers within my automation framework to support that testing.
Okay. And do you use like Chrome primarily, or the web driver? Does a web driver work with any browser, or do you focus on a particular one?
So I personally focus on Chrome, and so they're separate web drivers for each of these browsers, right? And so this just kind of in Selenium 3, there's been work done around that to kind of get these drivers more consistent, because they're all developed by different entities, and so there's some differences between them. And so Selenium 3 is promising us, which it was just released like maybe a month or two ago, so it's promising us a bit more consistency between these drivers. But yeah, they're different executables.
Okay. Is the intent that I write a test once, or at least a web test once, and it be able to be run multiple times on Firefox and Chrome and Edge? I should be able to run them, or do I have to make separate tests now? No.
So you would do it once, and what people typically do is set up like a properties file or like a Maven switch or something like that, your code will use as just a parameter. Okay, like which one of these am I using now? And so at that very setup point, you can say, okay, I'm going to run this on Chrome, so let me use the Chrome driver. But your test, all of that should be extracted out of the test itself. So that's done in some higher level before we begin type of thing, like the setup of the properties and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that Selenium's been around forever. I've used Selenium, gosh, I want to say 10, 12 years ago. But with Selenium 3, it's going from being what it was in the past, which was, a very complicated JavaScript framework, but it was just JavaScript. When I started with Selenium, it was, you would write tables in HTML.
Yeah.
And that, you remember, did you do that? Table-based tests?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. And now it's really moving forward to being almost like a standard. It feels kind of like WebDriver is becoming the way that the web is going. It's almost like Selenium is becoming a standard that everyone should learn.
Yeah, definitely. They're definitely making strides. Hats off to those guys. It's an open source product, and I met a lot of them at the Selenium conference in London this month, actually, a couple of weeks ago. And they are doing an excellent job with that project.
Yeah. So I understand that WebDriver, which is this testing tool, it might become a standard. Like it's going through the W3C. Did they talk about that at the conference?
No, they didn't. But they talked about like over beer and stuff, but not like an official talk. But yes, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that there are any other tools people should use when it comes to web development on the UI side, or would you say that it is safe to think about using Selenium if someone's listening to this podcast and they're not really using anything on the web for testing?
Yeah, so I strictly use Selenium for the UI. Now, I know a lot of people who use some other tools that are kind of wrappers around Selenium. Everybody's using Selenium for their base pretty much, though. But they might use like Protractor or different things like this that kind of help with more of those JavaScript front end. So as you know, like the web, we're going crazy with JavaScript right now. And so we have a lot of kind of fancy libraries and things that are being incorporated in our UIs. And so it's taking me, I like it actually from a programming standpoint. It makes it interesting, the development of the automation for things like that. But there are tools available where you can do a lot of the coding in JavaScript as opposed to like, say, for example, Java. And so like Protractor being one of those. But you can definitely do everything with like just straight Selenium. That's what I do.
Mm-hmm. So Protractor, just to make sure that folks are up to date, is a protractortest.org. It's an AngularJS end-to-end testing.
Yep.
Does it sit on top of Selenium?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of like it's like a wrapper. So you would get that, and you would have like the Selenium APIs embedded in.
Okay, and then you describe your tests in a form that makes people feel more comfortable, because sometimes people don't like those lower level
Right,
APIs. Exactly.
Yeah.
Have you looked at any of the things like Appium, that basically means Selenium for apps?
Yeah. So a lot of people who are doing like mobile automation, mobile testing are using Appium. I haven't used it at all. I don't do mobile testing much or yet. But yeah, so I hear that's pretty good as well.
Yeah, it seems like, if I understand it correctly, because I've been working on the Windows implementation stuff for Appium, that basically if you are a Selenium engineer, then instantly you become an iOS, Android, Windows automation engineer. Like, you know this, like you just added like 2 pages to your resume. Right? And you don't even know.
Right.
So native app automation apparently with Selenium. So it's using WebDriver. But it's driving native stuff.
Right. And that's what I mean. Like, there's all these cool tools that are coming out, but at the core is Selenium in all of them. So it's definitely the go-to right now.
Okay. So then what would you say to people who are listening who need or think that automation needs to be added to their their environment at their job? How do they go? Do they just introduce it, or they have to go to their boss and convince them it's a useful thing?
So what I say right off the bat is to hire an automation engineer. So I've seen so many teams that fail at trying to incorporate automation because the managers are leading this and they don't really understand automation, or they'll task a developer to do this and the developer might not understand automation. They understand how to code, but there's a lot of other things that go into automation development besides coding. I actually wrote a blog post on this and got a lot of feedback and differing opinions on it. But developers, I think there's a lot more to it than just coding in order for it to be successful. And then some managers might even task the testers to do it, right? And so I get a lot of testers who contact me and say, okay, I've been tasked with starting this automation initiative and I have no idea where to begin. Like, I have no coding background. I don't understand a lot of these things. So what I advise teams to do is to, hey, why not just hire an automation engineer to lead your effort? And everyone can still be involved. The development can still be involved. The testers can still be involved. But get someone who kind of has a clue about automation and how to set that up and how not to fail. Like, we've already failed plenty of times. And so we have these lessons learned and we know how to do this. So hire us.
Yeah. It's interesting. We tend to simplify things. We say that there's architects and there's developers and there's testers. But when you said people should just hire an automation engineer, I would suspect, and I'd be interested in hearing from the listeners, put it in the comments, do you have an automation engineer at your job? Some of them may be thinking, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they might think that they have QA in the general sense, or maybe even a build engineer. But the idea that to formalize automation is to declare that it matters to us as a company and to us as a project. Yeah.
And most of the roles that I work in are teams who have kind of tried that path where, we decided that it is important. We tried to get it going on our own. We failed miserably. Angie, please help us. Is kind of when I'm brought in. And so by then they kind of respect that, okay, this is a craft and maybe we should let her kind of lead us with this.
Yeah, I think the balance also is recognizing the difference between what value a human tester provides and what value automated testing provides. This really is a human problem. And we need to have the automation validate what we already know.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Seems like people are going to find bugs more than automated testing, do you think?
Exactly. I 100% agree with that. And that's another thing that I try to advise teams is don't try to replace your testers with automation. Like, you want these testers. They are subject matter experts. They know this application in and out. You want them exploring your application and providing the information and finding the bugs, right? And then your automation you want to use for those repetitive things. You don't want them to spend their time doing the same things over and over. Let them go explore the new areas, but have someone automating the things that we already know so that you have a sanity check that you haven't broken anything.
Right. So then that brings us all the way back to the beginning, which is if you find yourself doing something twice, think about automating that. And that really I think that would make the QA person's job a lot more fun. You just said, make them do the fun stuff, make them do the new stuff, and automate all the boring stuff.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So people can check you out at angiejones.tech. That's a great top-level domain.
Thank you.
And you've got workshops, conference talks, presentations. There's videos of your talks up there, and your automation blog.
Yep. So lots of good techniques and things on automation. So people find that pretty helpful.
And you've got a great sample on your GitHub, your automation bookstore, where you show how to use Selenium and Chrome Driver to go and drive a website.
Yep.
Very cool. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I enjoyed it.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes. We'll see you again next week.